You say you can't focus. That's a lie. You don't have a focus problem. You have a discipline problem. You're addicted to noise, notifications, scrolling, meaningless conversations, cheap dopamine hits. Your brain is fried, and instead of fixing it, you complain like a victim. Let me make this clear. A distracted man is a weak man, and weak men don't win. Ever. You've been sold the soft idea that focus is something you find, that one day you'll wake up and suddenly feel locked in. Wrong. Focus is built through elimination. You don't gain focus. You remove everything that destroys it. Every distraction you tolerate is a decision to stay average. Every time you check your phone for no reason, you're proving you're not in control of your own mind. And if you can't control your mind, you can't control your life. Let's talk about what I call speaking in tongues. Not some mystical nonsense. This is about the internal language you operate on. Most men have a weak internal voice. It's scattered, emotional, inconsistent. One minute you're motivated, the next minute you're lazy. That's because your mind is speaking chaos. Power comes when your internal voice becomes sharp, direct, and commanding. When your mind says work, there's no debate. When it says focus, there's no hesitation. That's a different language. That's dominance. Right now, your internal dialogue is diluted by distractions. Every useless video you watch, every pointless conversation you entertain, every second you waste it, fragments your mental clarity. You're training your brain to be scattered. Then you wonder why you can't focus for more than 5 minutes. It's not a mystery. You built that weakness brick by brick. Real focus is ruthless. It means cutting things off without apology. People, apps, habits, environments gone. You don't negotiate with distractions. You eliminate them, because every distraction is a thief, and it's robbing you of power. You want to become dangerous? Then become obsessed with control. Control what you see. Control what you hear. Control what you allow into your mind, because what enters your mind shapes your identity, and identity is everything. You don't act focused because you don't see yourself as a focused man. You still see yourself as someone who gets distracted. Someone who procrastinates, someone who tries. That identity has to die. Replace it with something stronger. A man who executes without hesitation. A man who doesn't need motivation. A man who locks in and finishes what he starts. That's the language of power. Focus isn't about working harder. It's about removing everything that makes you weak. Silence the noise and suddenly your mind becomes sharp, clear, dangerous. You start thinking faster, acting faster, winning faster. That's what happens when you stop feeding your brain garbage and start operating like a man with purpose. You don't have a focus problem. You have a control problem, and pretending otherwise is exactly why you're stuck. You sit there blaming your environment, your mood, your lack of motivation, but none of that is the real issue. The truth is simpler and harsher. You trained yourself to obey impulses instead of commands. Every time your phone lights up and you reach for it without thinking, that's not curiosity, that's submission. Every time you switch tasks because something feels slightly uncomfortable, that's not flexibility, that's weakness. You're not losing focus accidentally. You're giving it away piece by piece, decision by decision. Look at your behavior honestly. You don't drift into distraction, you choose it. You open the app, you click the video, you engage in conversations that don't move your life forward, and then you act surprised when your mind feels scattered. That's like poisoning yourself daily and questioning why you feel sick. The human brain adapts to whatever you repeatedly do. If you constantly interrupt your own attention, you train your mind to be unstable. If you constantly chase stimulation, you destroy your ability to sit still and execute. This isn't bad luck. This is self-inflicted. Control is not a feeling. It's a standard. It means you decide what deserves your attention and everything else gets rejected instantly. No negotiation. No internal debate. The moment you hesitate, you've already lost. Weak men negotiate with distractions. Strong men eliminate them before they even become an option. That difference is everything. Because the moment you allow exceptions, just one scroll, just 5 minutes, you're reinforcing a pattern of disobedience. You're telling your brain that commands are optional. And once your brain believes that, you no longer run your life. Your impulses do. Most people live like that permanently. They wake up and immediately surrender their attention to whatever's loudest, easiest, or most entertaining. They don't decide their day, their habits decide it for them. That's why they feel busy but achieve nothing meaningful. They're constantly reacting instead of executing. And reaction is the opposite of control. Reaction keeps you average. Execution builds power. If you want real focus, you need to become ruthless about what you allow into your space. Not just physically, but mentally. Every input matters. The content you consume, the people you engage with, the environments you tolerate, these are not neutral. They shape your attention. They either sharpen you or scatter you. There is no middle ground. And if you're honest, most of what you allow into your life is weakening you. It's noise disguised as entertainment, distraction disguised as relaxation. The uncomfortable part is this. You already know what needs to go. You just don't have the discipline to remove it. You keep things around because they're easy, familiar, and instantly rewarding. But that's the trap. Easy choices build a hard life. Hard choices build a controlled one. And control is the foundation of everything you claim to want: success, money, respect, dominance. None of it exists without the ability to direct your own mind. So stop pretending this is complicated. It's not. It's a series of small, brutal decisions made consistently. Don't touch the phone when you're working. Don't engage in useless conversations. Don't consume content that adds no value. These are not extreme actions. They're basic standards. The problem is you haven't been living by standards. You've been living by impulses. And impulses will never build anything worth having. The moment you take control, everything changes. Your thoughts become sharper. Your actions become intentional. Your time stops leaking into meaningless activities. And most importantly, you start trusting yourself again. Because when you give a command and actually follow it, you build internal authority. That's what most people are missing. They don't trust themselves to execute because deep down they know they won't. They've broken that trust too many times. Fix that, and focus becomes effortless. Not easy, but automatic. Because a controlled mind doesn't need motivation. It doesn't wait to feel ready. It acts because it said it would. And once you reach that level, distractions don't tempt you anymore. They become irrelevant because a man in control doesn't ask what he feels like doing. He decides what gets done, and then he does it. You've been conditioned to believe that focus is something you acquire, like a tool you can pick up whenever you feel ready. That belief is exactly what's keeping you ineffective. Focus is not something you gain. It's something you protect. It already exists within you, but it's buried under layers of noise you refuse to remove. You don't need more techniques, more productivity hacks, or another system. You need to stop letting garbage into your mind and expecting clarity to survive. Pay attention to how you live. Your day is filled with constant interruptions, notifications, scrolling, background noise, meaningless input. You've normalized chaos. Then you sit down to work and expect your brain to suddenly operate with precision. That's not how it works. The mind reflects its environment. If you surround yourself with distractions, your thinking becomes fragmented. If your thinking is fragmented, your output will be weak. You cannot build sharp results from a scattered state. Every distraction has a cost, whether you admit it or not. It's not just the time you lose, it's the depth you sacrifice. Real focus isn't about sitting at a desk for hours. It's about how deeply you can engage with what matters. And depth requires silence. It requires uninterrupted attention. The moment you allow distractions in, you break that depth. You reset your thinking. You weaken your momentum, and then you wonder why everything feels harder than it should. You keep trying to add more effort, more hours, more pressure without removing what's draining you. That's like trying to fill a bucket with holes in it. It doesn't matter how much you pour in if you refuse to fix the leaks. Distractions are those leaks. They drain your energy, your clarity, your ability to stay locked in. Until you deal with them, no amount of effort will compensate. Protection requires standards. It means you decide in advance what gets access to your attention and what doesn't. Not in the moment when you're weak and tempted, but before that. Because in the moment, you will default to habit. And if your habits are built around distraction, you will lose every time. Strong focus comes from structured boundaries. You control your environments. Your environment doesn't control you. This is where most people fail. They rely on willpower instead of systems. They think they'll just ignore distractions when they appear. That's unrealistic. Willpower is unreliable, especially when you spent years training yourself to seek easy stimulation. Instead, you remove the option entirely. Silence the notifications. Put the phone away. Cut off access to things that pull your attention. You don't fight distractions. You eliminate them before they can reach you. And let's be clear, this isn't about becoming extreme or isolating yourself from the world. It's about being intentional. There's a difference between using something and being used by it. Right now, most people are being used. Their attention is owned by algorithms, by constant updates, by anything designed to keep them engaged without giving them value. That's not harmless. That's a direct attack on your ability to think clearly and act decisively. When you start protecting your focus, something shifts. Your mind slows down in a controlled way, not lazy precise. You begin to process information more effectively. You stop jumping between thoughts and start following them through to completion. That's where real progress happens. Not in scattered bursts of effort, but in sustained, uninterrupted execution. You'll notice that tasks become easier, not because they've changed, but because you're finally giving them the attention they require. You stop overcomplicating things. You stop feeling overwhelmed, because overwhelm is often just the result of divided attention. When your mind is pulled in 10 different directions, everything feels heavy. When it's focused on one thing, everything becomes manageable. The uncomfortable truth is that protecting your focus will require you to let go of things you're used to. Habits, routines, even certain people or environments that don't align with what you're trying to build. That's where most hesitate. They want results without sacrifice. But focus demands sacrifice. It demands that you prioritize what matters over what feels good in the moment. And once you start operating like that, your standards rise. You become less tolerant of anything that wastes your time or weakens your attention. You start valuing clarity over comfort, depth over distraction, execution over entertainment. At that point, focus is no longer something you struggle with. It becomes part of how you operate because you've removed everything that used to destroy it. There's a voice in your head that never shuts up, and whether you realize it or not, it's running your entire life. Every action you take, every decision you make, every excuse you accept it, all starts there. The problem is, most men have no control over that voice. It's inconsistent, emotional, reactive. One moment it tells you to work, the next moment it convinces you to delay. One moment it pushes you forward, the next it pulls you back into comfort. That's not guidance, that's chaos. And chaos does not produce results. You've been taught to listen to your feelings, to go with the flow, to wait until you feel ready. That advice sounds harmless, but it's poison. Feelings are unstable. They shift based on comfort, fatigue, mood, and environment. If your internal voice is built on feelings, then your actions will always be inconsistent. And inconsistent actions guarantee average outcomes. You don't rise above that by trying harder, you rise above it by changing the language inside your head. Your internal voice needs to become directive, not suggestive. Right now, it sounds like a negotiation. Maybe I should work. I'll start in a few minutes. Just one more break. That's weak communication. It leaves room for debate. And the moment there's debate, your lower impulses step in and take control. A powerful internal voice doesn't negotiate. It gives commands. Clear, direct, non-negotiable. Start now. Finish this. Stay focused. No emotion, no hesitation, no alternatives. This isn't about pretending to be disciplined. It's about training your mind to operate on a different standard. Every time you ignore commands you give yourself, you weaken that voice. You teach your brain that your words don't matter, that instructions can be delayed or ignored. Over time, that creates a dangerous pattern where you stop trusting yourself entirely. You say you'll do something, and deep down you already know you won't. That's the real damage, not just lost time, but lost authority over your own mind. On the other hand, every time you follow through, especially when you don't feel like it, you strengthen that voice. You build internal credibility. You prove to yourself that when you say something, it happens. That's how discipline is formed. Not through motivation, not through external pressure, but through repeated alignment between what you say and what you do. It's simple, but it's not easy, because it requires you to act against your immediate desires. Most people avoid this because it's uncomfortable. Giving yourself commands means removing excuses. It means you can't hide behind mood, environment, or circumstances. If the instruction is clear, then the only question is whether you obey or disobey. And when you disobey, you have no one to blame but yourself. That level of accountability is rare, which is why most people stay stuck. The language you use internally shapes your identity. If your mind constantly says, "I'll try," you become someone who tries. If it says, "I can't," you become someone who avoids. But if it says, "I do," "I execute," "I finish," then your behavior starts aligning with that standard. Identity is not built through affirmation. It's built through reprimation. The words you repeat internally, backed by action, become who you are. This is where the shift happens. You stop seeing yourself as someone who needs to be pushed, and you start operating as someone who commands. You don't wait for the right conditions. You create them through action. You don't ask whether you feel ready. You move because the decision has already been made. That's a different level of control. That's where consistency comes from. Your environment will still test you. Distractions will still exist. Fatigue will still hit. But when your internal voice is strong, those things lose their power because you're no longer reacting to them. You're overriding them. You're operating based on instruction, not impulse. That's the difference between someone who occasionally performs and someone who consistently executes. And once that internal voice becomes sharp, direct, and reliable, everything else starts to align. Focus improves. Decisions become faster. Actions become cleaner. Not because life got easier, but because you stopped allowing confusion inside your own mind. You replaced noise with clarity, hesitation with command, and weakness with structure. That's what most people never do. They try to change their results without changing the voice that creates them. You keep treating distractions like they're harmless breaks, like they're something you've earned, something small that doesn't really matter. That assumption is exactly what's destroying your progress. Distractions are not neutral. They are active threats to your future. Every time you allow one in, you're not just losing a few minutes, you're weakening your ability to think, to execute, to stay consistent. That cost compounds, and most people are too blind or too comfortable to see it. Understand this clearly. Every second you waste is not isolated. It stacks. It builds patterns. It rewires your brain. When you constantly interrupt your own focus, you train yourself to operate in short bursts of shallow attention. You lose the ability to go deep, and depth is where real value is created. Anyone can be busy. Anyone can jump between tasks and feel productive. But very few can sit down, lock in, and produce something meaningful without breaking concentration. That's a skill, and distractions are actively eroding it. You might think, it's just 5 minutes. But it's never just 5 minutes. It's the time it takes to get back into the task. It's the mental energy you lose switching contexts. It's the reduction in quality because your mind is no longer fully engaged. Multiply that by how many times you get distracted in a day, and suddenly you're not just losing minutes, you're losing hours of effective output. And over weeks, months, years, that turns into lost opportunities, lost income, lost potential. Distractions also attack something deeper than time. They attack discipline. Every time you choose a distraction over your responsibility, you reinforce a habit of avoidance. You teach yourself that it's acceptable to escape when things get difficult or boring. That's dangerous because anything worth achieving will involve moments that are uncomfortable, repetitive, or demanding. If your default response to discomfort is distraction, you will never push through those moments. You will always retreat to what's easy. And let me tell you something, most distractions are designed to trap you. They are engineered to hold your attention, to keep you scrolling, clicking, consuming without thinking. You're not just casually using them, they are using you. They are pulling you away from your priorities and replacing them with meaningless stimulation. And the worst part is, you willingly participate. You hand over your attention, your time, your focus without resistance. That's not accidental. That's a lack of awareness and control. The long-term impact is brutal. You start projects but don't finish them. You set goals but don't follow through. You feel busy but make no real progress. And over time, that creates frustration, self-doubt, and a quiet understanding that you're capable of more but not living up to it. That gap between potential and reality grows wider, and distractions are sitting right in the middle of it, acting as the barrier you refuse to remove. High performers understand this differently. They don't see distractions as small indulgences. They see them as threats to their standards. That's why they guard their time aggressively. They don't casually check their phone during work. They don't allow random interruptions to dictate their day. They operate with intention because they know that success is not built in grand moments. It's built in the consistent protection of small ones. You need to shift your perspective. Stop asking whether a distraction is harmless and start asking what it's costing you. Not just in time, but in focus, in discipline, in identity. Because every time you choose distraction, you're not just wasting time. You're reinforcing the identity of someone who cannot stay locked in. An identity once established becomes hard to break. The uncomfortable reality is that you already know which distractions are holding you back. You don't need more awareness. You need action. You need to treat them with the seriousness they deserve. Not as optional habits you might reduce, but as problems you must eliminate. Because as long as distractions remain part of your daily routine, progress will always be limited. And the harsh truth is this: No one is coming to fix it for you. No system, no app, no external solution will save you if you continue to tolerate what's weakening you. The responsibility is yours. The choice is yours. You either keep allowing distractions to control your life, or you start removing them and take back control. There is no middle ground. You keep focusing on what you're doing, but you're ignoring who you believe you are. That's the real problem. Actions don't exist in isolation. They come from identity. And if your identity is weak, inconsistent, or undefined, your actions will reflect that every single time. You can push yourself for a day, maybe a week, but eventually you fall back. Not because you lack effort, but because you're trying to act against the person you still see in the mirror. You say you want discipline, focus, execution, but your internal label still says, I'm someone who struggles. I procrastinate. I try, but I don't always succeed. That language is not harmless. It programs your behavior because your brain's primary job is to stay consistent with your identity. If you believe you're the type of person who gets distracted, you will continue to get distracted, even when you temporarily resist it. You'll find a way back to that baseline. That's why most people live in short bursts of effort, followed by long periods of inconsistency. The mistake is thinking you can build a powerful life on top of a weak identity. You can't. It's like building on unstable ground. Everything eventually collapses back to what you truly believe about yourself. And most men never address this. They focus on tactics, routines, productivity systems, but ignore the foundation those things are supposed to stand on. Without a strong identity, all of that is temporary at best. You don't become focused by forcing focus. You become focused by becoming the type of person for whom focus is normal. That shift is not theoretical. It's practical. It shows up in your standards, your decisions, your non-negotiables. A man who sees himself as disciplined doesn't argue with himself about whether to work. He works, not because it's exciting, not because he feels motivated, but because it aligns with who he is. There is no internal conflict. Right now, you live in conflict. One part of you wants progress, the other wants comfort. One part of you sets goals, the other sabotages them. That conflict exists because your identity is unclear. You haven't fully committed to one version of yourself. You're trying to keep both the disciplined version and the comfortable version and switch between them when it suits you. That's why nothing sticks, because you haven't decided who you are. Identity is built through evidence, not words, not intentions, actions. Every time you follow through on something you said you would do, you reinforce a stronger identity. Every time you break that promise, you reinforce a weaker one. And these moments are constant. They happen daily, in small decisions that most people ignore. Whether you start when you said you would, whether you finish what you began, whether you stay focused or drift into distraction. These are not minor choices, they are identity-shaping actions. The reason trying doesn't work is because it leaves space for failure. It implies uncertainty. It suggests that the outcome is optional. But execution is different. Execution is decisive. It removes the possibility of backing out. You either do it or you don't. And when you repeatedly choose to do it, even when it's uncomfortable, your identity begins to shift. You stop seeing yourself as someone who needs to try and start seeing yourself as someone who delivers. This is where standards come in. Not goal standards. Goals are things you aim for. Standards are things you live by. Goals can be missed. Standards cannot. When your standard is execution, distraction becomes unacceptable. When your standard is discipline, inconsistency becomes intolerable. And when you violate those standards, you feel it immediately not as guilt, but as a misalignment with who you are. Most people lower their standards to match their behavior. High-level individuals do the opposite. They raise their behavior to match their standards. That's the shift you're avoiding, because it requires honesty. It forces you to admit that the reason you're not where you want to be is not lack of opportunity or knowledge. It's the identity you've been operating from. Once that identity changes, everything else follows. Your habits become easier to maintain. Your focus becomes more stable. Your decisions become faster. Not because life got simpler, but because you remove the internal resistance. You're no longer negotiating with yourself. You're acting in alignment with who you decided to be. And that decision is the turning point. Not when you feel ready, not when everything is perfect, but when you stop tolerating the version of yourself that keeps falling short and replace it with one that doesn't accept excuses. Because at the end of the day, you don't get what you want. You get what you are. You keep trying to add discipline into your life without removing what's destroying it. That's why nothing changes. You stack routines, set goals, plan schedules, but you leave the weaknesses untouched. And those weaknesses quietly sabotage everything. This is where most people fail. They want growth without subtraction. They want results without cutting anything off. That mindset guarantees stagnation. Ruthless elimination is not extreme, it's necessary. It's the difference between people who talk about progress and people who actually achieve it. Because every habit, every environment, every input you allow is either strengthening you or weakening you. There's no neutral ground, yet you treat everything as if it's harmless, as if it doesn't matter. It matters more than you think. The small things you tolerate are the exact things holding you back. Look at your daily life without excuses, the apps you open without purpose, the conversations that lead nowhere, the environments that drain your energy, the habits that feel good but produce nothing. You already know what they are. You don't need more awareness, you need the willingness to remove them. And that's where resistance shows up, because elimination is uncomfortable. It forces you to let go of what's easy, familiar, and instantly rewarding. Most people avoid that discomfort, so they stay stuck. They negotiate with their weaknesses, they reduce instead of remove. They say things like, I'll just limit it, or I'll manage it better. That sounds reasonable, but it's ineffective, because the problem isn't quantity, it's presence. As long as something that weakens you is still part of your routine, it will continue to influence you. It will continue to pull your attention, drain your energy, and break your focus. Ruthless elimination means you stop negotiating. You make clear decisions. If something doesn't contribute to your growth, it's gone. No gradual phase out. No second chances. You cut it off completely. That level of decisiveness is what creates real change, because it removes temptation at the source. You're no longer relying on willpower in the moment you've already removed the option. This applies to more than just habits. It applies to people as well. Not everyone around you is aligned with where you're going. Some people bring distraction, negativity, or low standards into your life, and if you keep them close, you absorb that. Whether you admit it or not, your environment shapes your behavior. If you're surrounded by people who accept mediocrity, you will find it harder to rise above it. That's not a theory, it's reality. Elimination also requires clarity. You need to know what actually matters to you. Because without that, you'll hesitate. You'll second-guess your decisions. You'll keep things around just in case. But when your priorities are clear, decisions become simple. If it aligns, it stays. If it doesn't, it goes. No emotion, no attachment, just alignment. And here's the part most people ignore. Elimination creates space. Not empty space, but usable space. Space for focus, for deep work, for intentional action. When you remove distractions, your mind stops being overloaded. You think more clearly. You act more decisively. You stop feeling scattered. That's not because you added something new. It's because you removed what was interfering. There's also a psychological shift that happens. When you start cutting off what weakens you, you send a message to yourself. You reinforce the idea that your standards matter, that you're not willing to tolerate anything that compromises your progress, that builds confidence, not the kind that comes from words, but the kind that comes from action. You start seeing yourself as someone who takes control, not someone who reacts. The reason this feels difficult is because it goes against how most people operate. Society encourages comfort, convenience, constant stimulation. It tells you to balance everything, to keep options open, to avoid being too strict. But that approach produces average results. Either the performance requires a different standard. It requires you to be selective, intentional, and sometimes uncomfortable. And if you're honest, the life you want will not be built by adding more distractions and hoping they don't affect you. It will be built by removing everything that slows you down, everything that weakens your attention, everything that pulls you away from execution. That's the real work. Not adding more, but cutting deeper. So here's the truth you don't want to hear. If you're distracted, it's because you choose to be, you're allowing it, you're tolerating it. And until you decide that your goals matter more than your comfort, nothing changes. You stay stuck, you stay average, you stay irrelevant, or you flip the switch, you cut the noise. You sharpen your mind, you take control, because a focused man is unstoppable. And an unstoppable man doesn't ask for permission, he takes what he wants.